Before prophecy speaks, history remembers. Before scripture was ink, it was echo. And every echo starts somewhere in the dust. The Prophet and the King. I ain't no prophet, ain't no professor either, but I've seen kingdoms rise on pride and fall on lies.
So that now the ancient walls have been reconstructed with bricks that bear the slogan, "From Nebuchadnezzar to Saddam Hussein." But today the ruins of his palace stand over the ruin of Babylon like a bad joke. The palimpsest of human history being written and rewritten, scrubbed out and started again.
And if you sit still long enough, with your boots in the dirt and your back to the wind, you start to see the patterns. History don't whisper. It howls.
A quick look at Daniel chapter 2. Most of us are familiar with this dramatic dream that the young king Nebuchadnezzar had.
It all started with a dream, carved in gold, cast in fear. Babylon. The city that wore pride like a crown. And the king? Nebuchadnezzar, lion of the empire, ruthless, glorious, obsessed with power. And prophecy. This story ain't about the king. Not really. It's about the man he nearly erased, Daniel. Exiled, captive. A Hebrew boy thrown into the empire's fire. And walked out a prophet. They threw him in with the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers. But he had something they didn't. Faith. Now, I ain't expecting everyone out there to know this story. It's old. Older than Rome. Older than Moses. Older than the dirt under those boots. But if you stick with me, I'll show you a dream so wild it rattled a king's bones. Now here's where the sky cracked. One night, the king saw something so heavy it rattled his bones. A dream, a vision. He wanted answers. So he called his wise men. told him, "Tell me what I dreamed, and then tell me what it means." The wise men? They stalled, lied, panicked. The king, he snapped, mass execution. Until one voice, one outlaw, stood up.
Take me to the king.
Daniel didn't know the dream yet. He hadn't seen the vision. But he saw the fire coming and walked right into it. It wasn't magic. It wasn't madness. It wasn't luck. It was obedience. When a man trusts God enough to walk into death, that's when heaven speaks. And just like that, a dream lit up the soul of a prophet. A vision sharper than any blade. He wasn't just a prophet. He was a boy, torn from his homeland, chained to an empire built on blasphemy. And still, he bowed only to God. Who is this God who reveals dreams and sends his servant to speak truth to thrones?
You better understand, you will be tested. Being bold doesn't mean you're going to become more popular, but being bold does mean you're going to be tested in more ways than you have in the past. Be bold enough to keep standing. Daniel is not foolish. Daniel is not unaware of what the consequences are. It's not like Daniel dreamed up and said, "This is the job I always wanted." No, Daniel had been ripped from his homeland, employed by a foreign government, and yet despite his situation, he still remains excellent, giving his very best because he knows he's not doing it for himself or them, he's doing it for God. And here is Daniel, who is standing strong for God. When you're bold for God, God will honor your boldness.
Next, the dream itself. Statues, empires, and a stone not cut by human hands. Just because truth walked in, don't mean the spirit of deception walked out. Because there's another spirit, one that don't fear God. It demands prophets fear it. So if you're still speaking truth in a world built on lies, stand your ground. Because the spirit still hunts, and the stone still moves. They call it the Jezebel spirit. The dream that shook kings.
Called upon Daniel, and Daniel, of course, did. And he not only told Nebuchadnezzar what his dream was, but he also interpreted what it meant.
You ever seen a man walk toward the blade with peace in his eyes? When every scholar turned away, Daniel stepped in. Not with scrolls, not with spells, but with prayer. That night, a dream that once vanished came roaring back, but not to the king, to the prophet. He dreamed a colossus, towering, terrible, timed.
And we're going to discover that this portrays 4 empires that will endure between Daniel and the 5th empire that God himself establishes on the planet Earth.
You've waited long enough. Daniel stands before the king. Ready to lift the haunting shadow from the kingdom by unveiling the dream only God could reveal. He walks the king through his dream and the meaning. A statue stacked in metals, like history in layers. The head, gold, Babylon, arrogant, glorious, lions on gates, dreams and fire, a king who saw himself in everything shining. It's silver, Persia, cold, precise, law without wonder, power without poetry. Bronze thighs, Greece, language like wildfire, ideas like arrows. They carved logic into stone, but couldn't hold the weight of their own brilliance. Iron legs, Rome, unstoppable, unfeeling, power paved in roads and crucifixions, built on bone. The feet, iron mixed with clay, strong, but splintered. Empires pretending to be united, but held together with fear. Then came the stone. Not carved, not conjured, but hurled by heaven. It hit the fault line. The Colossus collapsed. The stone didn't stop. It grew into a mountain. A kingdom not built by hands, but born of heaven. The builders rejected it, but heaven made it the cornerstone.
Is none other than the stone which the builders rejected, the one, it's an idiom, of course, of Jesus Christ. You know, it's amazing to take an idiom like a rock or a stone and discover how consistently it is used rhetorically throughout the entire scripture.
The mountain didn't rise to prove a point.
It's about 476 AD that the empire starts to break into pieces. But when I say the empire, I mean the western part of the empire starts to decay. And each of the pieces has had a bid at world dominion over the centuries. You can go ahead and trace all that from the Dutch, the French, the British, the Spanish, the Germans, and so on. But none of them quite ever establishing a comprehensive empire that had preceded it. Now, incidentally, Rome absorbs Greece in 746 BC. Lysimachus' system, that's one of Alexander's four generals, in 133. Seleucus, 64 BC. Egypt, 31 BC. It's interesting, each of these elements disappear from the scene before the birth of Christ. But the eastern leg of the Roman Empire endures 1,000 years after the western leg fell. The western leg fell about 476 AD, started to really break up into pieces. And the eastern leg endured till 1453, when it was finally overrun by the Muslims.
It rose to crown a king, not made of gold or code, but of blood and truth and eternity. When Daniel finished, the king didn't rage. He didn't boast. He bowed.
These same empires are profiled for Daniel by God directly, with a vision directly given to Daniel. Same subject, different idioms. Nebuchadnezzar saw it as man sees it, as a series of bright, shiny metals. God presented it to Daniel the way he sees it, as a string or a series of voracious beasts. In Daniel chapter 7, he sees a creature that looks sort of like a winged lion. Then that's followed by a bear that rises up on one side. And that's followed by a leopard that's moves so fast that he hardly touches the ground. And then there's the fourth one is so terrible, Daniel can't even find a comfortable parallel. He just calls it the great and terrible beast. And it's the one that has the 10 heads. And all these idioms are echoed for us all through the scripture, including the book of Revelation. So these idioms become very familiar to us if you study prophecy.
Daniel revealed the king's dream, and just like that, Nebuchadnezzar knew this was no ordinary man. Daniel's God wasn't a god. He was the God, the one above thrones. Even kings trembled when heaven whispered. But just because truth walks in doesn't mean deception walks out. There's a spirit, ancient, patient, that fears the prophet's voice. There's always been a war on prophecy, not just the message, but the messengers. Back then, it wasn't algorithms and censorship. It was blood. It was thrones threatened by truth. And Jezebel? She wasn't just a queen. She was a spirit. Back then, it killed with daggers. Now, with deals, with distractions, with silence. She doesn't just silence prophets now. She hires them, puts them on platforms, lets them preach what feels good, but never what's true. What Daniel saw wasn't just history. It was a warning. Empires fall, but spirits linger. And long before it had a name, it had a blueprint. The Tower of Babel. The Tower and the Thunder.
So first of all, we begin with a problem. Isn't it always fun to begin with a problem? And that problem is whether or not the site we know as Babylon is actually the same Babylon as the Babel of the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. I think I would agree with you, and we'd agree with everyone else, that the Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar's day in the Neo-Assyrian Empire, roughly the 600s, the 500s BC, that Babylon is in central Mesopotamia, and we can all agree that it's the site that everybody concludes is Babylon. But what about the Babel of Genesis 11? So I think there's a huge historical problem with the site of Babylon being connected with the Babel of the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. So the red arrow is pointing to the red dot, which is where Babylon is located. You can see it there just south of where the Euphrates and Tigris come closest together before they ultimately converge just northwest of the Persian Gulf's banks. Well, the Neo-Babylonian Empire featured a very important city, the largest city of its day, the most important city in the ancient world at the time, and that's the city of Babylon. That's the Rome of its day, the London of its day, if you want to talk about the British Empire. Basically, all roads led to Babylon.
Nebuchadnezzar's ziggurat was the biggest one ever made. It was the most impressive, and it must have had a very powerful effect on people who saw it for the first time and who lived under it, because wherever you were in the city, you would see this thing.
Behind that revelation, a greater storm was coming. Before Babylon was Babylon, there was Shinar, a land where the whole world spoke as one, where men shared one voice, one dream, one ambition. They said, "Come, let us build a tower that reaches the heavens, so we won't be scattered." Babel wasn't rebellion, at least not at first. It was ambition, a monument to identity, a hub for mankind to remember who they were, and where they came from.
And so one at a time, I've studied all of those areas and found only one that meets all the criteria of the famous site of the Tower of Babel, and that is the site of Eridu, which is in southeastern Mesopotamia. And that is the site, I have no doubt in my mind, of biblical Babel.
Nimrod, the tyrant of Shinar, built it as defiance. A statue at the top, a sword pointed to heaven. They weren't primitive. They were engineers, architects, thinkers, creators. They had knowledge, but no wisdom. Unity, but no God. Ambition, but no permission.
There are common themes that run through all of these stories. One of those themes is that civilization is cyclic rather than linear, that there have been previous cycles of civilization that have lasted for approximately 5,000 years. Something happens, those cycles come to an end, a new cycle begins. This is where it gets really interesting, because even though the cycles change, there appears to be a continuity of knowledge, a continuity of wisdom when it comes to the end of one cycle and the beginning of the next.
We spoke about sacredness of what we carry, about how you could lose your crown because you don't destroy the thing that God hates. When God hates something, or it is evil to him, and we hold it dear to us, there's a contradiction there, and it hurts him. But on the other hand, and I want you to listen carefully to me, he said to me, Kim, what I placed in many, many people is sacred. And if anybody touches what is sacred to me, then it is the end for them. If you believe that poverty is a virtue, if you believe that poverty is characteristic of God's people, you are hopelessly mistaken. And so what the Lord said to me was, I want you to take note of the disasters that took place over the years and see that history is basically repeating itself.
God didn't destroy the tower. He destroyed their understanding. A single disruption, and suddenly, no one could understand the other.
So ancient texts themselves from Mesopotamia attest to a time when there's a universal language, one tongue. And then it even says one of their gods is responsible for creating the multi-formed languages that later became universally known as being in existence. So this is an extremely important document.
Some say the tower wasn't just about reaching God. It was a warning shot. The war wasn't just vertical. It was prophetic. From Babel to Jezebel, the spirit is the same. Disrupt the word, silence the seer.
I don't just know this woman, I know thousands of this woman. Apostate, rebellious, independent, can't find any church that is biblical, mental health issues, sexual confusion, transgender ideation or at least approval, self-righteousness, profound deep religiousness, hatred toward any man who would say no or teach the Bible. That's the Jezebel spirit.
Jezebel hunted prophets, not just men, the message itself. But even Jezebel was once a soul loved by God. Pride may twist the heart, but mercy still remembers the name. Daniel stood firm in Babylon. Moses stood firm in Egypt. Elijah on the mountain. And today, they still stand. Some don't even call themselves prophets, but they speak truth anyway.
It's 9/11, everybody. Several times during the morning hours, I was awakened with tremendous burden.
There has been a terrorist act and will be another. For the Spirit of the Lord says America will retaliate. But God says even as they retaliate with natural weapons of war, And they said, we will go to the place of the east, and we will go and we will bring them down for what they did to our people as they flew in the air over Long Island. But the Spirit of the Lord says another will take place, and I will prevent many deaths, because I will cause a security thing to happen so that they will not die. I will look after you, America. But God says the retaliation will not be right. It will not be of my spirit. It will be a wrong decision. But God says the saints of the Lord, of the Most High God, will begin to pray. And yet God says, I will strike down the God of the East. I will bring something to pass very soon. I have told you about it. The very God of the East, the very King of the East, the very Prince of the East, the one that waged a war against America, and spoke about the mother of wars. For God says this is going to be the mother of wars.
To God to be misrepresented in such a fashion. I mean, you take Moses, God said to him, now I want you to strike the rock. Next time he said, speak the rock. Now Moses struck the rock, which meant he misrepresented God to that point where God said, you're not going in. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that's how fearful it is, and it still is, even though that's an old covenant time. Prophecy, to be able to the prophetic instinct and ability. I was saying to somebody the other day, you know, God's put his image in us. Sometimes we don't need prophecies to do something. We just know, don't do that now. There's a warning, just don't do that. Don't buy that house, don't do that now. That's what he, you know, that's the way he does it.
Once God gives a word about the future, he usually secures that prophet that he uses to give that word as the watchman on the wall. He doesn't speak to Ezekiel and say, okay, let's use, you know, Peter to do it. You know, just for, he doesn't do that. He speaks to Ezekiel and says, now you are the watchman because you have received the burden. God gave me the word. I didn't say 9/11, but I spoke about terrorists, and I saw it as if it had happened already because I was taken there. Terrorists flying planes over New York area. I did say Long Island because, you know, in my simplicity, I just looked and thought it was Long Island. That's the whole region. I saw it, the jets, the terrorist acts, and the whole thing. And therefore, because I spoke it before it happened and prophesied it, that qualifies me to be a watchman on the wall, which means that I'm going to carry the burden in prayer. I'm going to have words from the Lord when attacks are near, and I'm going to be fasting.
This wasn't just about a tower. This was about prophetic word and what happens when a civilization forgets it. When Babel fell, it wasn't the bricks that crumbled. It was the illusion of control. While they built empires on sand, he was laying the cornerstone. And in the distance, another shape rises. Pyramids, pillars, sacred scrolls sealed in sand. From Babel to Giza, something connects them. Was it defiance or forgotten memory? What are we really watching? A war against heaven, or a war against those who still hear from it? What is prophecy, and what is power? Is the tower gone, or has it just changed shape? But so too has the kingdom. The stone still rolls, and it invites all to kneel, not in fear, but in love. That stone, it wasn't just judgment. It became the cornerstone. If you're building towers without God, check your foundation, because the stone is still moving, and it doesn't miss. Maybe it's not bricks anymore. Maybe it's apps, algorithms, ideologies. Maybe the new tower doesn't reach the sky, just our hearts, where God no longer fits. The stone isn't just rolling toward empires, it's rolling toward you. So ask yourself, what are you building, and who are you building it for? Even if the towers fall, grace remembers the one who walked away from the crowd and still believed. The prophecy continues. The civilization rises, and the stone is still moving. The scroll has also changed its form. Just a signal. But what happens when the towers fall again? Not the ones made of stone, the ones we built from code and copper. Power cuts, food stops, voices go dark. Jezebel don't need blades no more. She's got distraction. The prophets still speak.
So the Watchers, now I've seen these events. The Lord's allowed me to go back in time to see these events, and I'm only telling you what I experienced. I watched the giants walk the earth. The Lord took me back in time for a week or so. Let's talk about demons. Now, I've seen a lot of demons. Yeah, they're very real. They're actually not what the horror movies try to make them out to be. A lot of that is just facade and illusions and stuff like that. They like to project a greater facade because they're so insecure. Demons and fallen angels are not the same thing. We have a couple of instances biblically where we see angels that fall. We see that there was a rebellion in heaven where he deceived the angels, and there was a rebellion in heaven. Those are fallen angels. Demons are the disembodied spirits of the giants, okay? Now, the Nephilim. The Nephilim were on the earth. According to Genesis 6, there were these giants on the earth that were a result of angels and humans having intimate relationship. Okay, you know what I mean by that. And when these giants were killed off, their spirits roamed.
Not the loud ones, the true ones. Enoch saw it all. Still walking, still watching.
They have different forms and functions. So one of the issues is that we often refer to a bunch of these things as angels. Angel is not what the thing is, it's what the thing does. So malach in the Hebrew or angelos in the Greek means messenger. So it is not a description of its ontology, what it is, it's a description of what it does.
Got it.
The Book of Enoch is part of the literature that's trying to explain that. What on earth is this? Right there. So like angels, seraphim, cherubim, and then how these are portrayed. And I particularly go through the manuscripts and how both Christian and Jewish interpretation of them reflects them differently. Are these characters which the Book of Enoch is trying to make sense of, along with demons. And so the way that they go about that is by capitalizing on the events that happen immediately before Genesis chapter 6 and the biblical flood, where you have the great-grandfather of Noah, Enoch, as this character who is explaining some of these fallen angels or beings. Genesis chapter 6 says that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were pleasing to the eyes and slept with them. And that these created men of renown. And that's the word Nephilim.
Ah, there it is.
So the trickiness of this is that in ancient Judaism, when it's translated into other languages, Nephilim is almost exclusively translated as giants. But the word etymologically in Hebrew, Nephal, literally means to fall. So there's this whole narrative within ancient Judaism of these things are fallen angels. And so, but that's not the same thing necessarily in ancient Judaism as demons, and that's where it gets complicated.
And when the silence hits, you'll hear who's still standing. Not an algorithm, not an idea. The king, the rock that don't move, the word that don't glitch. So when the lights go out, make sure your soul's planted on him.
And he said it would be for a greater purpose than people have said, disaster or judgment, but to unlock some treasures in the earth.
They once built with sand and stone. Now they search with metal and tone. Chapter 3. The rediscovery of hidden knowledge. Next. If you're still with me, you know what to do. Unless the grid goes out first.